My parents looked me in the eyes and said, "We wish you were never born." The words cut deeper than any blade. My chest burned, but I stood tall. I looked at them and said, "If that is what you wish, then consider me as if I never existed." Then I walked out. My footsteps echoed like gunshots against the silence. 30 minutes later, the whole party panicked. My phone lit up 36 missed calls. From the same people who just erased me. My name is Ryder Blaze. And this is the story of how I was broken, erased, and then reborn. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments? Or tell me where you're from. I love hearing how far my story reach. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. And if my story resonates with you, please consider subscribing to this channel. Sometimes all it takes is knowing someone out there cares, and your support helps me keep telling the truth. I woke up before the sun, the skyline of Chicago framed by my small South Loop apartment window. The city looked alive already, steel and glass catching the first blush of light. Today was supposed to be my day. The day years of exhaustion, endless nights at the office, and relentless sacrifices finally meant something. I told myself not to think about money, not to think about the bills I paid that weren't mine, not to let anything ruin the glow of my MBA graduation. My phone buzzed before I even stepped into the shower. A text from Mom. "Remember, let Avery sit in the middle. Your guests can take the side table." 10 seconds later, Dad added, "Don't brag about that $1 million project. It sounds arrogant." I stood there staring at the screen, the steam filling the bathroom, my chest tightening. Even on my day, the center belonged to someone else. When I walked into the kitchen, Elliot was already there, leaning on the counter with 2 coffees. He had a grin on his face, that same unshakable grin he'd worn since high school. "This is your day, Ryder. Don't let anyone steal it." He handed me the cup. I forced a smile, but my stomach twisted. On campus, balloons swayed in the June air. Professors in dark robes shook hands. Families cheered, and my name was called. Professor Holt hugged me, whispering, "You are one of the sharpest minds I've taught. Don't forget that." At the reception, Colleen clapped me on the back, her voice carrying above the crowd. "You saved that deal when no one else could." Tonight, we drink to that. Their pride in me felt real, tangible. Yet when I checked my phone, it buzzed again. This time a notification from the restaurant: the deposit had been adjusted. Additional 2 tables added per family request. I hadn't approved that. My card had been charged anyway. By late afternoon, I stood on the bridge overlooking the Chicago River, the water flashing green under the sun. I opened my leather journal and wrote, "I don't want to be used anymore. I want to be seen." I snapped the cover shut as my phone vibrated once more. This time it was Avery. "We need to talk tonight. It's important." Back home, I checked the seating chart the restaurant had sent. My friends, my colleagues, the people who had carried me through, were pushed to the far edge of the room near the kitchen. My parents' side of the family occupied the center. Avery's name was written in bold across the main table. My own name looked like an afterthought. For a second, I thought about canceling everything. But then I opened the voice recorder on my phone. If they tried to humiliate me, if they erased me again in front of everyone, I would have proof. I pressed record and slid the phone into my pocket. As evening fell, the city lit up in amber headlights crawling across Michigan Avenue. I buttoned my suit jacket, looked in the mirror, and told myself, tonight they will see me. Still, Avery's message blinked on my screen like a pulse I couldn't ignore. The walk across campus had stirred something I tried hard to bury memories of when I first realized I was invisible. Naperville, Illinois. A quiet neighborhood where lawns were trimmed and houses all looked alike, but inside mine the rules were never the same for both children. At 15, I had just won the Illinois State Math Championship. I came home with the medal still warm against my chest. Dad barely glanced at it before turning to the neighbor, smiling. Avery's already writing her pre-med essays. She'll be a doctor, the pride of this family. The medal might as well have been plastic. Then came my birthday party. Balloons of sheet cake on the table, friends from school crowded into our small living room. I leaned in ready to blow out the candles when I noticed the icing. Across the top, in bright red letters, "Happy Birthday, Avery." My name was squeezed into the corner like an afterthought. My friends laughed, thinking it was some kind of joke. I laughed too, even though something in my chest cracked. It was Elliot back then, just another awkward kid in the math club who leaned toward me during the party and whispered, "You don't need their permission to shine." I didn't know then how much I'd cling to those words. One summer afternoon, helping Dad clear boxes in the garage, I stumbled on a file labeled College Fund, Kids. My hands shook as I flipped it open. Every line item, every withdrawal was marked for Avery prep courses, lab fees, application consultants. The balance was nearly drained. My name wasn't on a single page. When Mom noticed me holding the folder, she snatched it away. "You're the older one," she said briskly. "You'll go into finance, you'll make money quickly. Your sister needs this more." The words cut deep, lodging like splinters I could never dig out. I tucked the math medal into a shoebox under my bed beside old notebooks and pencils. It stayed there gathering dust while Avery's biology awards lined the mantel. At family dinners, every story circled back to her. I became the background character in my own house. Years later, I would understand that the college fund was supposed to be for both of us. It had been drained long before I even applied for schools. That's why I had to work shifts at a coffee shop, why I filled out scholarship applications in the dead of night, why I learned to survive on ramen while Avery's tuition was covered without question. I still remember the way Aunt Janet pulled me aside once, her voice low. "Don't tell your mother I said this, but they already decided your path a long time ago." She squeezed my shoulder before walking away, leaving me with the truth I wasn't ready to face. My life had been written for me, and I was never meant to take center stage. When Mom later tucked that folder back into the box and snapped the lid shut, I knew my road would always be uphill. I would always be asked to give while Avery was destined to receive. I chose economics because it was practical and fast. Graduate early, get a job, get my own place, stop being a burden, that was the plan. At Urbana-Champaign, I learned to live small. A mattress on the floor, a desk from a curbside giveaway, a calendar covered in shifts. Monday, Wednesday. Friday, I opened the campus coffee shop at 5 a.m., the dark air smelling like beans and bleach. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I keyed case numbers at a law office until midnight, fingers numb from the fluorescent hum. Every month I sent money home to help with the house. It felt good at first, like proof that I was useful. Then it became expected, then required, then invisible. When my first paycheck landed, I took the train to a department store and bought Mom a soft gray scarf I'd seen her admire in a catalog. I wrapped it myself and wrote a note about how one day I'd be able to do more. That night, Dad texted, "This month Avery needs a new anatomy set. Can you transfer a bit extra?" No mention of the scarf, no mention of me. I made the transfer, stood at the bus stop in the cold, and watched my breath leave my body. The requests gathered a rhythm, always urgent, always last minute. "They won't release her lab slot unless we pay today." There was a surprise fee for clinical hours. The utility bill posted late. I learned how to move money between accounts like sand through a fist. Every time I told myself this is the last emergency. Every time another arrived. Avery and I talked in the narrow space siblings carve out when the family weather is bad. She called late after labs, exhausted and grateful, telling me about a professor who finally remembered her name, about a patient who made her cry in the best and worst way. She never asked for money outright. It always came through Mom or Dad. That made it easier to pretend we were on the same team, that I was investing in our future, that one day there would be a reckoning where all of this was seen and counted. Elliot became my checkpoint. He'd find me behind the espresso machine after a double shift and slide a hot sandwich across the counter. "You're burning from the inside, man," he said. I told him I was fine. I said it so often it sounded true. Later, in my quiet room, the floor heater ticking, I opened a blank spreadsheet and typed a title I didn't want to see: Ledger. Family. I started listing every transfer, every bill I covered, every time I bailed out a deadline someone else missed. The numbers lined up like a confession. I kept the files synced to my phone, a secret bookkeeping of love that nobody else wanted to balance. The summer before my senior year, the calls turned into alarms. The first tuition loan for Avery's next term hit a snag hours before the cutoff. Mom's voice shook on the line. They need a guarantor for just a few weeks until Dad's paperwork clears. It's nothing. I signed the guarantee from a library computer, heart-hammering, telling myself it was temporary. A few months later, a bank representative called to confirm the extension of the guarantee on a restructured loan, my name featured in bold. I stared at the ceiling after the call, the fan blades blurring. We had agreed it would be temporary. We had promised it would be removed. That evening, Avery texted, "I thought they took your name off." "I'm sorry." I believed her. I didn't want a villain. I wanted a family that kept its word. I graduated, found a junior analyst job in Chicago, moved into an apartment barely big enough to turn around in, and learned how to breathe again. The city gave me edges I could lean on. I worked, I rose, I made myself useful in rooms that noticed. The money home continued. It always did. When the company promoted me into strategy, and I finally saw a path up, I called home to share the good news. Mom asked about Avery's board prep. Dad asked when I could front the exam fees, and we'll settle later. Later never came. The scarf I bought for Mom showed up in a family photo on the mantle behind Avery at Thanksgiving, not on Mom's shoulders, but tucked under a crystal vase, a prop, a piece of set dressing. I looked for meaning where there wasn't any. It's just a scarf, I told myself. It's just money. It's just the role you play until they realize you're more than the role. By the time I applied to the MBA program, I had learned the language of crisis. I negotiated vendor contracts by day and negotiated with my own blood by night. When I got in, I paid the deposit with a laugh that sounded like a cough. I packed my life into 3 boxes, told myself the degree would change the math, and moved to the South Loop. Years later, on the morning of commencement, Mom sent a calendar invitation called Pre-Dinner Planning. It slid onto my screen with the cold efficiency of office software. When I opened it, the seating plan was already decided, the main table centered for Avery and the maternal side the overflow table designated for my colleagues near the service hall. "We've arranged a seat of honor for your sister," Mom wrote, as if I had asked. I stared at the invitation, then at the ledger, family file glowing in my dock. For a long minute, I did nothing. Then I closed the laptop and tied my tie. If they pushed me to the edges again tonight, I needed to know what I would do when I finally ran out of edges. The restaurant in the Loop looked like a postcard from a life I thought I wanted, warm light, low jazz crystal stemware that caught the room's breath. Elliot walked beside me, bumping my shoulder on purpose, the way he does when he senses I'm drifting. Profa. Holt arrived in a navy dress and hugged me with both arms. Colleen waved from the bar, her grin bright enough to clear a path. For a brief second, the evening felt clean. Then my parents appeared with the practiced smile of hosts who know the script. They hugged me softly and pivoted hard, sweeping Avery forward like a centerpiece. "This is our Avery," Mom said to Professor Holt. "She saves lives." Dad shook Colleen's hand and asked what it was like to work with someone who sits at a desk all day. I swallowed the taste of metal. I glanced at the floor diagram the maitre d' had placed on the stand. The central table glowed under a ring of pendant lights. Avery's nameplate sat at the middle beside my mother's, surrounded by a half-moon of relatives. My own name was printed at a corner table near the kitchen door, the one that breathed steam and clatter each time it swung. My friends, people who had fought for me and with me, were assigned there too. When we took our seats, a colleague I admired asked my parents if they were proud. Mom's smile was thin. "He's good with numbers," she said. "But Avery, well, she saves people." Colleen lifted her glass and began to speak about the deal I had rescued in the spring, how it had kept a company from collapsing, how it had saved the jobs of 1,000 families. Dad cut in politely. "That is his job," he said. "It's not the same." The table absorbed the judgment like a spill. I kept breathing. I told myself to remember the river, the journal, the promise I made to myself hours earlier. Elliot pressed his hand to my shoulder under the table. "Not your fault," he whispered. Behind us, an aunt I barely knew murmured to her husband, "Ryder has money, but no soul." I didn't turn around. I fixed my eyes on the candle and watched the flame tremble. On my way back from the restroom, I passed Avery, who was turned slightly away from the room, speaking to a friend from her residency. Her voice was hushed and hoarse. "If Ryder hadn't paid," she said, "I would have crashed a long time ago." but they'll never say that out loud. The truth sat between us like a third person. She saw me flinched and looked down. I nodded and kept walking. I wanted to tell her I understood. I wanted to tell her that understanding didn't make the weight any lighter. Back at the table, my phone buzzed. A coworker had tagged me in a story. I tapped it open and saw the glowing center table, the caption reading, "The doctor's family is the star tonight." The camera panned across faces I knew from childhood and cut away just before it reached mine. I watched it twice. The second time hurt more. An email banner rose along the top of my screen from the restaurant updated invoice. I opened it without thinking. The total stared at me, my card on file, my name in the line that mattered. I scrolled to the note section. "Thank you for hosting this celebration," it read. "Congratulations to Avery." My parents' laughter floated across the room as they told a cousin that they had put this evening together for our Avery, who makes us proud. I felt something in me click into place, not a snap, but a steady lock. I raised my glass and clinked it softly with my spoon. The room did not quiet at first. Then it did, voices falling like coins into a well. Colleen looked at me. Professor Holt folded her hands. Elliot watched my face the way you watch a friend on a cliff. I stood, shoulders squared, the murmur thinning into a hush. I could feel the jazz fading behind me, the candlelight pooling at the base of the glass, the door to the kitchen swinging open and shut in a rhythm I had known my whole life. I filled my lungs and held the room in the space of a breath, ready to stop pretending I wasn't there. The room clicked into stillness when my spoon kissed the rim of my glass. I felt the heat in my throat and let it steady into words. "If I'm just the wallet," I said, my voice shaking the first few syllables before it found bone. "Then who paid the bills, the tuition, the hospital?" For a breath, no one moved. The jazz stuttered and went quiet. Someone set a fork down and it sounded like a gavel. I kept going because I had carried this ledger in my head for 10 years. I paid the power when the lights flickered. I covered the late fees when the notices came in red. I guaranteed loans I was told would be temporary loans that somehow never let me go. Every month I sent money home so someone else could breathe. Murmurs rustled around the table, a ripple of fabric in a room too warm. Dad's face colored to the shade of a warning light. "You ungrateful child," he said louder than he needed to be. "We wish we had never given birth to such a disrespectful son." The sentence hit like a door slamming in a quiet house. I stared at the candle and watched the flame bend and stand back up. I swallowed tasted copper and scanned the faces that had seen me grow from a kid with a medal into a man who paid for the cake and still didn't get a slice. "If that is what you wish," I said, and my voice surprised me with its calm, "then consider me as if I never existed." Chairs creaked. A cousin's lips parted. Colleen's eyes went fierce with a kind of protective anger I had never felt on my behalf from blood. I set my glass down its base, clicking the crystal. I walked away. The hard wood floor gave my steps a beat. I crossed the ring of light past the maitre d' and pushed through the brass-handled door into the hallway where it smelled like citrus cleanser and cold air. Ryder Elliot called, catching up, but I lifted a hand without turning. "Let me go alone." He slowed, and in that pause, I felt the clean edge of something ending. The lobby lights flattened the evening into a film still. Outside, the loop hummed and blinked. A text flashed before the door closed behind me. "Avery, I am sorry. I know what you've done. I was afraid to say it." I stood under the awning while the valet whistled for a cab, and I looked at the message until the screen blurred. I typed nothing back. In the taxi, the city slid by in wet strokes, red and white reflections smearing across the windshield. My phone buzzed like a trapped insect. Mom, Dad, Aunt Janet, a colleague who didn't know what to do with the silence I had left on that table. The driver glanced at me in the mirror as if he could feel the noise in my pocket. I let it ring. I let all of it ring. When I reached my building, the river threw back the city's lights in shredded coins. I climbed the stairs to avoid the elevator chatter, unlocked my door, and stepped into dark. I didn't turn the lights on. I set my phone on the counter and faced the window, the city breathing below. The screen lit again, insistent. When I finally picked it up, the number on the lock screen stared back at me. 36 missed calls. I counted them because counting is what I do when I need the world to make a shape. 36 attempts to pull me back into the old role in the span of an hour. 36 times I chose to stay gone. An email pinged and slid into view, tidy polite. Thank you for your payment. Congratulations to Dr. Avery. I laughed once, a sound without humor that cracked at the end. Even the receipt had learned the family's script. I powered the phone down and the apartment went completely quiet. I kicked off my shoes and walked to the window. The river was a black seam stitched through the city's chest. Somewhere in the restaurant, a candle guttered out. I set my forehead against the glass and said it out loud, to the street, to the water, to whatever part of me still needed permission. Tonight, I'm free even if it costs me. I stayed there until my breath stopped fogging the window. Then I crossed the room, shut the door to the hallway tight, and let the silence hold. Morning arrived like a knock I didn't want to answer. I turned the phone back on because work would need me, and the messages flooded in as if a dam had cracked somewhere before dawn. Dad, you embarrassed us in front of everyone. Mom family comes first unless you decide you're above it. Cousin's commentary dressed up as concern. Avery, please don't hate me. The screen pulsed with judgments and pleas in alternating stripes. I put the phone face down and tried to breathe. At the office, the world made sense again. Numbers lined up. Plans had outputs. Colleen stepped into my doorway without knocking and leaned on the frame. You told the truth, she said. I'm proud of you. The words landed softly where the others had bruised. Later, an email from Professor Holt found me between meetings. Your voice is clear. Keep it that way. It was like being handed clean water after days of salt. By evening, the sky over the river was the color of an old bruise. I was reheating leftover noodles when the intercom buzzed. I pressed the button and heard my mother's voice, too composed to be casual. We're here. Let us up. The elevator took forever, and then not long enough. When the knock came, it was a quick, practiced rhythm I hadn't heard at my door in years. Mom stood in front, Aunt Janet beside her dad, a step back with his jaw set. They didn't ask to come in. They assumed. I met them in the doorway and didn't move. We need to talk, Mom said. Avery's program has costs. It's your responsibility as the son to help your sister. The word responsibility hung there like a looped rope. My responsibility ended, I said, when you told me I didn't deserve to exist. The air thinned. Aunt Janet's eyes dropped to the hallway carpet. Dad's gaze burned past me into the apartment as if he could appraise square footage and turn it into moral debt. Avery's name lit my phone on the console before anyone answered. She was video calling. I held the screen up and her face filled it, red eyes, hospital corridor behind her, fluorescent lights flattening everything. I knew, she said, voice cracking. I knew you were carrying it all. I should have said something. I was scared if I stepped out of the light I'd lose everything I'd worked for. Her confession didn't absolve anything. It only made the shape of the machine clearer. Dad spoke over the call, firm, tired of pretense. We needed someone to handle the finances, and you were born to do that. That's how families work. Don't make this dramatic. The sentence was a key turning in a lock I had been rattling my whole life. I put the phone down, let Avery's image hover face up on the table, and reached for the binder I had tucked on the shelf by the door. I had printed the ledger, family file, the week I was accepted into the MBA program, maybe because a thing on paper feels harder to deny. I opened it to the first page and handed it to Mom. This is 10 years, I said. Rent when you were short. Medicine when insurance fought you. Winter gas bills. Late fees. 2 rounds of tuition loans I guaranteed and was told would be temporary. You don't have to thank me, but you don't get to pretend it didn't happen. They turned pages in silence. The hallway hummed with other people's dinners and televisions. Finally, Mom handed the binder back like it was contaminated. That's what an eldest son does, she said, crisp and chilly. It isn't a favor, it's duty. I could feel the anger rise and pass the way a fever breaks. No, I said. It was love. And you kept calling it duty so you wouldn't have to love me back. I stepped into the doorway, making the space smaller. From now on, you will figure it out without me. I am not the family's wallet anymore." Aunt Janet's mouth trembled like she might speak, but she didn't. Dad squared his shoulders, the old posture of final authority, but there was nothing left to command. The elevator chimed at the end of the hall. Somewhere a dog barked twice and went quiet. Mom started to say my name the way she did when I was 8 and late for dinner. I nodded once, not at her, but at the past. "I hope you find a way," I said. "I hope Avery finds her own balance and her own voice. But I am done." I eased the door inward until the frame touched their shoes. "Take care of yourselves." I closed the door. The latch caught small and decisive. For a moment I stood with my palm flat to the wood, feeling the vibration of the hallway on the other side. Knuckles hit the door in a rapid burst. The old list of names returned through the barrier, selfish, ungrateful, dramatic like ghosts, who hadn't learned there was no house left to haunt. I slid down until I was sitting my back to the world I'd just sealed off. Tears came without heat, not anger, but evacuation. I let them. My breath grew slow again. The knocking thinned, then faded, then moved down the hall, their voices dissolving into elevator cables and the hum of the building. In the quiet, I could hear the river, low and constant, the city's pulse that didn't care about our family's scripts. I stood, wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweatshirt, and looked around the little room that had held me through late nights and early mornings. The scarf under the vase in the old photo flickered across my mind and then drifted away for good. I powered the phone down once more and set it on the table beside the closed binder. I didn't have to prove anything anymore. The door behind me was just wood and paint and hinges, but it felt like a line drawn in wet concrete. On my side of it, air. On my side of it, room enough to live. After closing the door on my parents that night, I buried myself in work. I arrived early, stayed late, volunteered for projects that scared other people off. My mind was raw from the confrontation, but I poured every sharp edge into strategy decks and negotiations. Within months, I was leading a multinational project that had been teetering on collapse. Colleen introduced me in meetings as if I were already a partner. My colleagues began to look at me differently, not as the quiet analyst who stayed late, but as someone who carried momentum into the room. One morning, as the first sun touched the loop, I opened an email from Professor Holt. She had heard of the deal I'd steered to safety. Her words were simple. "You are living proof that intelligence and grit don't need outside permission to matter." I read it 3 times, each line pressing into me like a hand steadying my back. I sat at my desk that afternoon, hands trembling over the keyboard, and wrote what I had never dared to say out loud. On LinkedIn, under an anonymous profile, I described what it meant to be the invisible child, to be the wallet for a family that never once said thank you, to be told I wasn't worth the space I took up on my own graduation night. I didn't name them. I didn't need to. I ended with one line that came from the marrow of my bones. "Silence and success are the sweetest revenge." I hit post and shut the laptop, convinced nothing would come of it. By evening, the numbers had gone feral. Thousands of shares, hundreds of comments. Strangers confessed their own scars. I was the invisible one too. You put into words what I've carried for years. I scrolled until my eyes blurred, realizing I wasn't an island. I was part of an archipelago of children who had been overlooked, underestimated, erased. For the first time, their voices wrapped around mine. The following week, Colleen walked into my office, smile fierce. "You're going to speak at the Resilience in Business Conference. They want your story." I froze, breath lodged in my chest. On stage, under a canopy of lights, I told the truth without naming names. I spoke about resilience, about carrying a weight no one else acknowledged, about finding freedom when you stop waiting for permission to exist. The applause rose like a wave and broke over me. I walked off stage lighter than I had in years. I moved into a new apartment that fall. A penthouse floor-to-ceiling glass with Lake Michigan stretching endless outside my window. The first night, Elliot and Colleen stood with me on the balcony. We raised glasses of cheap champagne, laughing at the absurdity of the view. "Family," Elliot said, clinking his glass against mine. I nodded, throat tight. It wasn't blood. It was better. News of my success spread quickly. Old neighbors whispered to my parents. Cousins forwarded articles. The emails started to arrive. At first they scolded, "You've abandoned us. You only care about yourself." Then they shifted into pleading, "Avery needs help. Don't turn your back." I read them in silence, my reply as steady as stone, nothing at all. Late one night, Avery's name lit my screen. Her message was a confession folded into regret. "I'm sorry. I knew how much you carried. I just wasn't brave enough to say it. I hope someday you can forgive me." I let the phone rest in my palm, then set it face down. Some words can't fix what years have carved. I stood at the window, Chicago glowing beneath me, the lake breathing its dark rhythm. "Now I live for myself," I whispered to the glass, "and nothing can drag me back." The city answered with silence, and for once, silence felt like love. By summer, I decided to host a dinner in my penthouse. No formal seating charts, no relatives competing for the center. Just pizza boxes on the marble counter, bottles of wine breathing open on the table, and the people who had chosen me. Elliot sprawled on the sofa telling stories of our high school math club days. Colleen leaned back in her chair, eyes crinkling as she laughed. Professor Holt raised her glass, her voice steady. "Ryder, you've redefined what resilience means in this industry." My face burned with a humility I had never known at home. I stood and let the words come. Once my own family told me I wasn't worth existing. But I've learned that value isn't defined by blood or old scripts. Real family is the people who choose to stand beside you, not because they must, but because they want to. Applause filled the room, not the forced politeness of a banquet hall, but the warm rhythm of genuine hearts. Elliot crossed the space and hugged me so hard I almost laughed. "You deserve this, man. Every bit of it." Halfway through the night, my phone lit up on the counter. 5 missed calls from Mom stacked one after the other. I flipped it face down and smiled. No hesitation, no pull. The conversation at the table roared on without a hiccup. Later, as laughter still hummed through the room, I checked my email and found a message from Aunt Janet. Her words were quiet but certain. "You deserve joy. Don't let them drag you back. I am proud of you." Tears slipped before I could stop them. Maybe the bloodline wasn't all poison. Maybe a single thread of grace could still weave its way through. On Instagram, the anonymous post had sparked a movement. Invisible no more spread across feeds and cities. Messages poured in from people I had never met, thank yous, confessions, promises to break their own chains. I realized my story had outgrown me. It belonged to anyone who had ever been made small and dared to stand tall anyway. When the last guest left and the door clicked shut, I walked to the window. The city blazed with light streets, alive, the river cutting silver between towers. I opened my journal one final time. Ryder Blaze, free man, starting a new chapter. I closed it, placed the ledger, family in a drawer, and turned the key. The past was accounted for, the debt was paid. I leaned on the glass, watching the city breathe. "If you've ever been told you don't matter," I whispered, "remember you do. Let go of the chains. Build the family you choose. Freedom is waiting, and no one can take it away from you." The room was quiet, but the lights of Chicago flickered back bright and infinite as if to agree.